Brilliant. Welcome, everyone. Hi, nice to see you all, and thank you for joining us today for this OfS student debrief focusing on all things consumer protection in higher education. So my name's Ed. I've got the pleasure of chairing today, and I look after the Student Insight team here at the OfS, and I'll be joined by some of my colleagues who we will introduce as well in due course. But seriously, thank you very much for joining us today. Just to let you know, we will be recording the session, and we'll go through some kind of the housekeeping bits in a moment. But if you've been to one of these sessions before, welcome back. Lovely to see you again. And if it's your first time here, thank you very much for joining us. We hope it'll be a really kind of useful hour for you to run through everything consumer protection, and we'll have a interactive kind of question and answer session. So please do keep your questions coming in, and thank you to those of you who have submitted questions to us beforehand. So in today's session, we will be running through some recent OfS news and developments. We'll also be discussing consumer protection as our main agenda item, and we'll also be opening the floor to questions later on as well. Just to say at the outset, in terms of questions, we're obviously here for consumer protection today. So if you have a question about anything kind of outside of consumer protection, I would invite you to email it in to us so we can kind of answer those separately. And we will be kind of focusing on consumer protection today. And also, like I said, thank you very much to those of you who have already pre-submitted questions, but we'll also be taking questions live as well. So in terms of today's session, we'll be involving my wonderful colleagues, so Sally Lambis, who you'll meet in a moment, alongside Harriet Smee and Katie Lawn, who will be taking you through various elements of today's session. Like I said, we're really hoping this will be an interactive session, so please do keep your questions coming in through the chat. There'll also be an opportunity for you to ask live at the end of the session as well. And yeah, we'll bring you through that when we get to it. But what I'll do first of all is hand you over to my colleague Harriet, who'll be talking to you a bit about how this information is all going to be used and what we'll be doing today.
Hi, I'm Harriet. So first of all, I'm going to talk us through how we're going to use your input. These events are a really valuable way for us to hear your views and experiences, and they help us to understand student perspectives and make sure that we act in the interest of students. Because of that, the comments, feedback, and observations that you share with us may be used to inform and develop our policy, and they may appear in future OfS publications. To protect your anonymity, anything we use will be unnamed, and we will usually paraphrase contributions rather than quote them directly. There should be links in the chat with more information on this shortly. Just a few housekeeping points. This call is going to be recorded for sharing on our website afterwards. We want everyone to be able to contribute, and we really appreciate your openness and engagement. However, we can't guarantee absolute anonymity of participants when using some of the interactivity tools we have today. So if you do have any questions or concerns, please let us know by email by contacting info@officeforstudents.org.uk. Thank you for all of your pre-submitted questions. We'll be covering several of these in our presentation, and there'll be time to cover others in the Q&A section later. So now I'm going to go through what's been going on at that. I'd just like to share a few brief updates. In November, we launched our new strategy. This is our vision for how we'll regulate the higher education sector between now and 2030. Our new strategy is focused on delivering in the interest of students and is informed by student feedback that we've gathered over the last year. Among our priority areas will be student experience and support. This includes making sure that all students receive a high quality education and get the experiences that they've been promised. To make sure these things happen, we'll be ambitious for students from all backgrounds and vigilant about safeguarding public money and student fees. We published information for institutions to consider when supporting students with disabilities as well. Disabled students are entitled to expect the same experience and outcomes from higher education as their non-disabled peers, but we know that in practice this expectation isn't always met. In our insight brief, we set out the differences in attainment of disabled students who include around a fifth of the undergraduate population. It also examines the differences in experiences of disabled students as reflected in the National Student Survey and elsewhere, and summarises views gathered from universities and colleges about the issues they face in working to resolve these differences. We also published new analysis on how degree classifications have changed over time, as well as analysis showing the proportion of top grades awarded have fallen after considerable increases in recent years. I mentioned this at our last event, but in case you haven't attended before, or if you've seen it already, our short film that we created last year is a brilliant way to understand what we do. So please do give it a watch and share it with anyone who would like a brief summary of us and our work. You can find out more about these on our website. So I'm going to hand over to Sally Lambis and Katie Lawn.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Sally and I'm leading some of our consumer protection policy work at the OfS. I'm also joined by my colleague Katie, who works closely on this with me. So our ambition is for students to be treated fairly, and this means that your universities and colleges are clear on our expectations about their consumer protection obligations to you, and that they do the right thing by you. So the work we're doing in the consumer protection space is good news for students because we'll be working on some real steps towards meaningfully strengthening student protections. And just to say, because we regulate primarily in the interests of students, being in dialogue with students as well as the sector is a real priority for us as a regulator. So we're especially pleased to see so many of you with us on the call today. In this session, we'll be talking to you about consumer protection and what that means in the context of higher education. And importantly, we want to hear your views. We'll also touch briefly on a public consultation on consumer protection, which we will publish around Easter. We're proposing a set of changes to our regulation of institutions, which will better protect students in the future. And you will all invited to contribute to that, and would be keen to hear from students, student representatives and student-facing teams. And we'll let you know how you can take part in that at the end of this session. So as Ed has already mentioned, it's really important to say that while we can talk about our plans for the consultation and our regulation work generally, we can't give advice on consumer protection law or discuss individual cases. That's because as a regulator, we don't review individual student complaints, although we do take them into account as part of our regulatory intelligence gathering. For the students on the call, if you think you have not been treated fairly as a consumer, you should always first raise a complaint with your university or college. And if you're not satisfied with the outcome, you can raise it with the Office of Independent Adjudicators for Higher Education. And the OfS has some guidance on this. We'll share a link with that information in the chat now, and we'll also include this in the follow-up email from this session, so you can come back to it later. So before we get into the higher education context, what is consumer protection law and why does it matter? Well, consumer protection law exists to protect consumers from unfair or harmful practices by businesses when consumers buy goods and services, and that applies to higher education too. For example, if you buy a pair of blue jeans online and the description says they're a size 12, you expect to receive blue jeans in size 12. But if when they arrive, they're actually a size 16 and a different colour, you'd expect to be able to complain or get your money back. And consumer protection law is there to ensure that you are treated fairly as a consumer. In other words, you're given clear and accurate information about a product or service before you buy something, that your contract with the seller is clear and fair, and that you're able to make a complaint and sort things out if anything goes wrong. And the same applies to higher education. When you enroll in a course, you're effectively buying a service from a university or college, which means students are treated as consumers under UK law. And all universities and colleges that provide higher education are legally required to follow consumer protection law. Those protections don't just apply to the higher education you're receiving, but also to other services universities might provide to students, such as accommodation or library services. So what this means in practice is students should get clear, accurate and timely information about their courses, fees and other services the institution has committed to provide, clear and fair terms and conditions, and access to complaints processes that are fair, easy to understand and use. And this really matters because, as everyone on this call knows, choosing a university or college is a big decision financially and personally, and probably one of the most important investments you will make in your lifetime. But we know that many students feel that promises made by universities and colleges aren't always met. And actually, in a survey we did recently, we found that 75% of students said that universities and colleges were not fully delivering on their promises. And in that same survey, we also found that students' awareness of their rights is low, which further compounds what is already a significant power imbalance between students and their university and college. And if you're interested in any more of the findings from that research, my colleague Martha will drop another link into the chat now. And finally, it's worth saying as well that while the universities and colleges have obligations and students have rights under consumer protection law, those legal rights are separate from what we as the regulator can do through our regulatory requirements. So as a regulator, while we'll be informed by the law, we do have the ability to ask more of universities and colleges to try and address that power imbalance. So this is all about students being treated fairly. I'm going to hand over to Katie now, and she'll take you through some activities and examples.
Thanks, Sally, and hi everyone and welcome. So this is where we'd really love to hear from you, and we're going to be asking you to do some voting and a bit of audience participation via sort of polls and things like that. So bearing in mind the background that Sally has just given you, our first question is, if we go to the next slide, what does being treated fairly by your university or college mean to you as a consumer of higher education, so as a student? So if you can have a bit of a think about that and put your thoughts in the chat for us, that would be fantastic. And bear in mind that anything you put in the chat will be visible to everybody on the call. And when you're thinking about this, you can draw on your own experience or maybe the experiences of other students that you've worked with if you're a student rep. And I think we also have quite a lot of university staff and other sort of HE professionals on the call. So if you're not currently a student, we would still love to hear from you. And you can answer this thinking about the student you've worked with and your own kind of knowledge. And that goes for all the activities and questions in this section. So I'm just going to be quiet and let you concentrate for about 30 seconds. Chat there. See some really interesting things coming through. And I can see people thumbs upping some of the responses, and if there's anything that kind of resonates for you, definitely kind of give it a thumbs up or add to it. So that is our 30 seconds. And what's really interesting here is there's a huge range of things coming through. So this idea of fairness is quite broad and there's lots of different things that can fall under it. But I can definitely see the theme of promise, what was delivered, and that is really central to this. So it's really interesting to see that coming through. So thank you everyone for contributing to that activity. We'll come back to some of these ideas later as we kind of work through the next parts, because we'll think a bit more about consumer protection and what fairness sort of looks like in practice. And some of you have given some really great examples already as well. So if we go to the next slide, what actually is fair treatment? So obviously, as we've kind of hinted at, and do keep your responses coming in. I'm sorry, I've got to rush us through some of the content, but we will sort of read through all of those. So what is fair treatment? For us to regulate universities and colleges and make sure they're treating students fairly, we need to actually kind of have a definition of fairness and what that looks like in practice. So one thing that we're exploring is setting out some positive principles in our regulatory framework that providers would be expected to follow. And just to say that these are all still in development, we're kind of giving you a more finalised version of these will be included in the public consultation that Sally mentioned earlier. So we think that as well as complying with consumer protection law, universities and colleges should also act according to the principles you can see here. And just to sort of briefly unpack what we mean by these principles. Number one here is promoting students' understanding of their rights. So that's about making sure students clearly understand their offer, their terms and conditions, and the course content and the fees and all of the information that they need to kind of know. Delivering what's been promised, which was a big theme in the responses I've seen coming through already. That's all about universities following through on those commitments that they've made, whether that's in an offer letter or a contract document or even marketing materials as well. Number 3 is proactively identifying risks to course delivery and services. So what that means is universities and colleges should be spotting potential problems, especially problems affect how they deliver what they have promised to students, and they should take action before those problems escalate. Number 4, acting in good faith, is all about kind of honesty and openness and just kind of putting that at the heart of working with students. So especially when things go wrong, how things are handled would definitely sort of be related to number 4. And then number 5 is enabling effective support, and that is about making sure students can get help with any complaints in a fair and accessible way. So of course, all of these different elements are hugely important, but we'd like you to help us kind of understand what you feel is most important to you. So we're going to do a quick voting activity, and I'm hoping that a voting box will pop up on our screens shortly. And what we'd like you to do is to select the 2 principles that you feel are the most important to you, and then click submit. So I can see that's popped up for me now, so hopefully you can all see it. And just to say, there is no right or wrong answer here. This is more about us understanding what feels most important. And I know it's a difficult choice because they are all so important. So I will pause for a little while and let you cast your votes. And I hope that we will see those coming in. Okay, great. Just going to give you a few moments. And if there are any tech issues or you can't see the voting screen, just pop your answer in the chat as well. Can't click 2 at the same time. No. Okay, in that case, pick your top 1. Even harder task. Okay. So if we are happy to pause the voting there, I think we're sort of front runner. And thank you, Claire, for flagging that. So almost half of you have selected deliver the education and services they have promised to students, which is really at the heart of, you know, consumer protection, what we're trying to do. So really, really interesting. Act in good faith. Okay, fab. Thank you so much for that. That's really, really, really interesting for us. So this kind of feedback is really, really helpful for us, because if we're going to regulate universities and colleges, we need to be really clear about sort of what fair treatment means and what is actually affecting students. So if you want to say any more about why you selected your 1 top option, then please do pop those in the chat as well, because we'd love to sort of, you know, get more context on that as well. So we're now going to look at a short scenario, and we're going to use this as a starting point to think through fairness and how consumer protection applies in higher education. So we pop onto the next slide. I'd like you to imagine a student called Jordan. So I'll just talk you through this. Jordan enrolls on a master's in environmental management at a university. Before accepting the offer, Jordan looks at the marketing materials from the university and the course handbook, and those materials promise some things that Jordan is really excited about. So they talk about having lots of fieldwork opportunities internationally. They talk about having a specialist module on sustainable practice and having industry experts to deliver that. And they also promise that there will be transparent and collaborative working with students when they make decisions about how the course is managed. So based on those 3 promises, Jordan thinks, okay, great, I want to take this course, I want to go to this university. So Jordan accepts their offer, pays full international fees, and then relocates to the UK to start their course. So far so good, but let's add a little bit more detail to the story. So Jordan turns up, starts their course, but after the first semester, the university decides to make some changes. They withdraw the specialist sustainable practice module, so that doesn't happen, and all international fieldwork is cancelled and replaced with an online case study exercise. And all of these decisions are taken without any consultation with students. So just take a moment to think about that, particularly in light of what Jordan was promised before accepting their offer. So we'd like to get your view on this question in yellow at the bottom. So do you think the university's actions in this scenario were fair? And another little voting box should pop up, and it should be a thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, their actions are fair. No, they're not. I remember this is kind of about your judgment of fairness, so that's what we're really interested in. And yeah, I can see quite a clear how people are voting. So thank you very much. I'll give a few more seconds. Just see if anyone wants to vote thumbs up. Okay. And if we pause the voting there, I think that's a pretty decisive outcome. So we all think that that is not fair, apart from 1% actually has done a thumbs up. So that's really interesting as well. So that is really, really helpful for us. And if we go on to the next slide, we'll add a little bit more context, which, as Harvey has highlighted, without context, it is quite difficult to tell. So we'll add a little bit more. So when Jordan and the other students raise concerns about these changes, they're told that the revised course is academically equivalent. They're also told that the course handbook allows the university to make changes at any time. And then alongside has decisions because they're in financial trouble and they need to make some urgent savings. So with that extra context in mind, we'd like to ask the same question again. So another voting box will pop up and you can do a thumbs up or thumbs down. So I'll give you a few moments to cast your votes. Okay. A few more seconds. Okay, interesting. So if we can pause the voting there as well, what's really interesting is we can see a little bit of a shift here. So there are slightly more people who think that universities' acts were fair, and it's really interesting that that context looks like it's made a little bit of a difference here. And what's really interesting isn't just how people vote on this kind of situation, but why. So if you voted that the university's actions were fair, it would be great if you could tell us in the chat what it was that swayed your decision. And if you voted that the actions were not fair, it'd be really helpful to hear what mattered most to you as well. And there's no need to sort of give us a huge amount. It's more just so that we can kind of understand what those sort of deciding factors are for people on the call. So again, we're seeing some interesting things coming through and some tricky experiences. So appreciate you sharing those. I'm conscious that I want to get through all of the activities and get to the Q&A, so I will whisk us on to our final activity. But if you have more thoughts, please do pop them in the chat or email us if you don't want to sort of share things that are visible to the whole call. But just to say that, you know, these are exactly the kinds of judgments and trade-offs that sit at the heart of fairness, and it's this kind of thing that we're trying to sort of navigate in a way that's constructive and supportive of, you know, students. So if we go to the final activity slide, we're now going to talk about something that sits right at the heart of consumer protection in higher education, and that is the contract between a student and their university or college. And essentially, many of you on the call probably know this already, but essentially your student contract explains what the university promises to provide and what is expected of you as a student. So you have to agree to this contract before you start your course. But the contract you're agreeing to isn't just a single document. In legal terms, it also includes a lot of other materials. So that would include your course handbook, policies, and all of those documents and information are also considered to be part of this kind of student contract. And although it probably doesn't sound like the most exciting thing in the world, that set of documents will dictate your university experience to some extent, because it sets out their commitments to you and what will happen if things don't work out. And we also know that students don't always engage. When I was a student, I don't always engage with their contracts. They're sometimes written in quite unclear language, and they're written very differently by each kind of university or college, so there's not much consistency. And the documents are sometimes spread out across various places on the university or college websites. They can also be hard to find. And then even more importantly, at the OfS, we've seen that some student contracts that are out there already in the world do still contain terms that are unfair. So, for example, just to kind of give you a tangible example of that, some contracts allow major courses, so what we would call kind of material changes, without giving the students proper notice or choice, like Jordan in the example. And one way we think we could help with this is by working with universities, colleges, and students to build out a kind of model student contract. We're calling it that, but we're not quite sure what it's going to look like at the moment. And again, this is a bit of a sneak peek of something that's very much at sort of early stages of development. So this model student contract, what it could be in actual fact is maybe a sort of very high level structure for a student contract, which could be used as a starting point. Or it could be a set of guidance about student contracts, which universities and colleges could use, but it could also have a kind of student-facing kind of explainer element, or it could be something else entirely. But we think there's some really important work to do here to kind of boost students' protections through these contracts. So the goal for us is really for all universities and colleges to have fair which don't contain wording that unfairly disadvantages students. And we'd also be aiming to have a little more consistency in how they're written. So just so that would make it easier for students to understand sort of one contract to another if they were going to compare anything. We also would love them to be written in kind of simpler, less legalistic language, which is clearer to students and kind of everyone. So this is just a very kind of quick temperature check on this about whether you think something like this would be helpful. As I said, we don't quite know what it would look like, so appreciate I've given you kind of like a very vague idea of what this could be. But our question is, do you think a more consistent student-friendly approach to student contracts would help? And again, you can answer this as a student, as a professor, everybody on the call. So another voting box should pop up on your screens now. And again, it's just a very sort of quick thumbs down. Doesn't really sound helpful, and appreciate that it's quite vague, and we're happy to talk about it more in the Q&A if that's helpful. So I'll just go down and have a look at what's coming through. And Matt, it would be guidance most likely, so it would be very, very unlikely to be mandatory. Lovely, I can see some responses coming through. Interesting, okay. Great to see some positive sentiment. And for those of you that have, well, put thumbs up or thumbs down, actually, again, if I could invite you to comment in the chat, it's just really, really helpful to hear your perspectives, whether you're kind of student, professional. So yes. Interesting, okay. And Martha, if we can pause the poll there, I think that's a bit of interactive activities. So I've kind of rushed you through a lot of different questions there, but we just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and actively participating. We love hearing directly from you, and we really, really appreciate you being here. So I'll hand back to Sally now for the next little bit.
Thanks, Katie. And that's all the content and activities we have for you today. But before we move to the Q&A, I just wanted to thank you again for sharing your views today. Your comments, feedback, and all your observations from this session are going to be used to inform and further develop our policy. And specifically, we'll be using it to feed into the public consultation that we're preparing, which I mentioned earlier. When it launches, we'll let you know how you can comment on our proposals in our online survey on our website. And as you've attended the session today, we'll email you directly with the links to the consultation. But you'll also hear about it in Student News in May. You'll need to sign up to receive this if you haven't already, and we'll post it on our socials on LinkedIn and X. But we will also be hosting a consultation webinar once we publish the consultation, where we'll set out our proposals and take any specific Q&A, which you're welcome to attend. We're really keen to hear any questions this has raised for you. So I'm going to move on to the Q&A, and I'll hand over to Ed.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally, and thank you, Katie, for taking us through that, and equally echo my thoughts as well. It's been really useful to kind of have all of your input coming into this. So yeah, thank you very much for continuing to interact with us. So that's not it in terms of our session though. We do have the interactive kind of question and answer session. So if it's okay, I'm going to invite you to put any questions that you might have in the chat. Otherwise, in a moment, we will also unlock the videos and the microphones if you wish to raise your hand, so that you could ask it in person if you so wish. That's absolutely fine as well. But what I'll do to start with, if it's okay, is I will go to one of the pre-submitted questions to start with and invite Sally and colleagues to answer, if that's okay. So the first question is quite a broad one, really. What will the OfS be doing to protect students as consumers?
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for that question. It's a great question. Well, we're doing several things, and we also currently are undergoing certain activities. So you've already heard about the consultation that we're planning on this new condition for registered providers for universities and colleges. That will require providers to treat students fairly, and that will replace an existing condition we have. And the aim is to set out clear expectations to treat students fairly. It'll be a combination of sort of positive principles and also some rules, as well as a requirement to publish key documents and information for students that they can engage with more easily. And as part of that, we'll be preparing information for students as well. And they're welcome, as I say, to join the webinar. You've already heard about the work on the student model contract. What we've done already is we have also implemented a new initial condition of registration last summer, which requires providers to demonstrate that they treat students fairly in order to be registered with us in the first place and access the benefits of registration. Now, that's some of the planned work, but we already conduct monitoring of all institutions and universities which we regulate, and that means regularly engaging with them as part of our ongoing monitoring, so that and we do and can raise consumer protection concerns with them to be addressed, and if they don't address them, we can obviously take our own regulatory action against them. Another element of that is we've got a partnership agreement with National Trading Standards, which means we can refer cases to them for investigation, and that usually results in an institution addressing those concerns. But if not, the National Trading Standards can use enforcement action through the courts. And the sorts of issues we refer and have referred to trading standards include things like unfair terms and conditions, but also publication of false or misleading information on a provider's website or other course materials, organisations that wrongly claim to be registered with the OfS or have say they have a degree awarding powers or university title when they don't, or any other kind of misleading advertising, as well as unclear or unfair complaints processes. And what we do is we publish those case reports and bring them to the attention of providers so they can learn from them. So that's just some of the work that we do. I should also mention, we mentioned earlier the research. OfS also conducts research, and you would have seen, hopefully in the chat, that Martha posted the consumer rights research, which examines students' perceptions of their rights as consumers and the promises made to them by higher education providers. So all of that is worked into our regulatory work and our proposals.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally. I'm going to go to some questions I can see in the chat just to preface this section, if that's okay. Unfortunately, we're unable to talk about kind of any live cases or any or around any particular providers. So we can talk in kind of generalist terms around kind of concepts and ideas, but unfortunately, we won't be able to comment on any apologies, I can never say the word, specific cases or instances, because that could interfere with our ability to regulate, I'm afraid. So just to kind of put that context out there. One of the questions which I can see in the chat so far is why wouldn't condition C5 be applicable to existing providers? And Sally, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about C5 as well, for those who don't know.
Yeah, so C5 is an initial condition of registration which came into force last August. So it would be for any newly registered providers, any providers, sorry, who want to register with the OfS would need to demonstrate that they're treating students fairly. So that means the 400 odd that are already registered with us were not subject to C5.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll just quickly go back to a pre-submitted question. How will the OfS promote and enforce student consumer protection and student consumer rights when we also have things like the Consumer Markets Authority, the Office for the Independent Adjudicator and trading standards?
Yeah, that's a great question. Covering a bit of the similar ground as before. I mean, CMA, as you know, we work with the CMA, OIA, and the trading standards quite closely anyway. CMA very much looks to sectoral regulators like the OfS to promote and enforce consumer rights. But we do engage with them as well for best practice sharing. We also engage with the Office of Independent Adjudicators, again, sort of sharing information of where complaints are sort of, what areas complaints are being, sorry, what areas there are the most complaints in and the flavour of those complaints. But how we go about it is, as a regulator, we hold providers or universities and colleges to account for their conduct, and we monitor them against our own ongoing conditions and take regulatory action if we think they've breached them.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. One of the questions which I think came up in the middle, which is a very useful question actually. When we were talking about the kind of model contract, does Open Day handbook and kind of marketing materials count towards the contract?
That's a really interesting question. It's something that we're considering now as part of our proposals. But it's something, as I say, that could form part of the contract, but that will very much form part of our proposal. So look out for our consultation.
Brilliant, thank you. One of pre-submitted questions was around consumer protection and responsibilities of validated provision. So this is where a provider subcontracts their arrangement to another delivery partner. And they were wondering what are responsibilities of validated provision for both a validating university and a registered provider, especially when the student is contracting with a partner and not necessarily the university or the lead provider.
Yeah, another great question. I mean, as I say, we're developing our proposals at the moment, but what I can tell you is the direction of travel is very much that we're proposing that condition would apply to a provider that only delivers higher education. So through a subcontractual relationship or partnership, or through a validation partnership. And that's because we don't think students that are having their education delivered by those types of entities should benefit from a lower level of student protection or consumer protection. But likewise, we propose that the condition would also apply to the lead provider in any such relationship, because the providers may not deliver the teaching, but they do have other responsibilities and duties towards students.
Brilliant, thank you. A question in the Q&A section. Are students entitled to refunds over strike action? With a higher education crisis going on at the moment, should it just be expected by every student?
Another great question, and I'm going to not answer that right now because you may know that there is a test case in the courts brought by UCL students about this very issue. So I'm going to wait for the outcome of that. Thank you.
No worries at all, and apologies, not practicing what I preached myself. Unfortunately, we cannot speak about live cases, I'm afraid, in this particular session. Another question which has come in is, how are students meant to learn their rights? So students are very time poor and have no spare time, and with students' unions being defunded, there's no incentive for students to teach students their students' rights, is what one of our questions has come through.
Yeah, it's another really great question and something we've been really thinking about as a team. One of the principles, if you recall back to when Katie was doing some of the activities, was for providers to promote understanding amongst students. And part of that is not only ensuring that documents are sort of easy and accessible, but going further and seeing if they can take steps to engage students with their contracts in a sort of efficient and easy way. And the student model contract work is also part of achieving that.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question, since the guidance was refreshed in 2023, does the OfS have any kind of data about how universities are progressing their compliance with the CMA guidance? And also, do we know which areas universities are struggling with more?
I'd have to get back to you and take that away in terms of the data, but we do sort of, as I say, monitor universities for compliance. I mean, one of the areas I can tell you is terms and conditions, which unfairly favour universities. And in just before Christmas, we actually referred a number of providers to the national trading standards because they had a number of terms, including industrial action clauses, which limited or excluded their liability. But again, we're waiting the outcome of the national trading standards investigation into that.
Perfect, thank you. An interesting question in the chat is, what about artificial intelligence? So, what considerations might we have around kind of AI-generated courses and AI-generated coursework, etc.? Also, just say we did have a student debrief on artificial intelligence previously, so yeah, there may be more in this space in the future. But Sally, I don't know if you've got any thoughts from a consumer protection perspective on that.
I mean, it's a really interesting point, but I think off the top of my head, from a consumer protection point of view, you would, if a course was going to be delivered by AI or it was involved in any other part of the delivery, we'd expect students to be told upfront before they made the choice to choose that particular course or to study with that provider.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. What I'm going to do now is invite if anyone has any live questions that we'd like to ask directly. If you have any questions, please feel free to put your hand up using the raise hand feature. Otherwise, if you want to carry on posting in the Q&A section or in the chat, we'll also continue to pick those up. In the meantime, apologies, I can't see any hands, so I will go to one pre-submitted question. Is how do focus of these debriefs is obviously trying to encourage students to participate in this, and essentially what the individual wants to know is how will the OfS utilize this kind of insight gathered from this. I know you touched upon there's kind of future consultations which are due to take place and that will be factoring in the contributions from today's session, but is there any other ways which students could kind of participate in this topic and get information through to us?
Yeah, I think I mentioned we'll be hosting some webinars once we publish the consultation, and we will be sending you a link to invite you all to come along. And there you'll hear about our sort of fully formed proposals that and the specific questions that we're asking alongside them. So we'd really invite you to join the Q&A there as well, and submit responses if you'd like to through our online survey.
Perfect, thank you. So if it's okay, I will go to the live question. Again, just to re-emphasize, unfortunately, we can't talk about individual circumstances or specific cases. But if you've got a general question, yeah, please do go ahead. I'll ask my colleagues to unmute the hand that's up. You may need to unmute your own mic as well.
No, I can hear you. I didn't know if I need to be called on directly. But
No, you're
it's
going to
on.
answer your question.
Okay, okay, very good. My concern right now is how does OfS stop suspensions? Sometimes in a school, they have these procedures that allow them to just automatically suspend students without consideration, consultation, and this can derail students' long-term plans for development. That's what I'm interested in having OfS deal with specifically. All these rules and regulations, they just, to me, just push out efforts that students must do to further their education. I'm against too many rules and regulations. Students first.
Thank you. Sally, I don't know if you want to respond to any part of that particular question.
I think it's a helpful observation. Thank you. I don't really have a response because I'm not sure it sits directly within the remit of what we're looking at right now.
Okay, thank you. And one of the things to say is, as a regulator, unfortunately, we are here as a regulator. We're established by law, but we are here to, ensure that students get the best possible education, and that that's why we are looking at consumer protection, trying to see what we can do within our regulatory powers, and where we don't have regulatory powers, where we can consult and meaningfully make changes to affect these things in the future. So yeah, hopefully this is kind of the midpoint on the journey and continuation of us being able to enact this. But yes, we hear your point. So yeah, thank you very much for that. I'm just going to go quickly back into the Q&A section just to see if there's any other additional questions in there. And apologies, one of the questions, as I said, unfortunately, I'm unable to talk about specific cases. So apologies, I'm unable to answer the top question there. Another question which has come in, is the idea of the new ongoing condition of registration regarding consumer protection rights will be more strict than initial condition C5? If it's not more strict, is it fair that students in currently registered providers will receive less consumer protection scrutiny potentially than others?
Hi, thanks for that question. It's not less or more strict. We're looking for something that is fairly consistent in terms of our expectations. We're not looking for lower expectations, but what we're doing is adapting it to be appropriate to being an ongoing condition for providers. So instead of just looking at the point of entry, we'll be looking at things in practice. We'll be looking at cultural change around. That's why we've developed these positive principles, really encouraging providers to go beyond the sort of minimum expectations of the law. But we'll have a lot more on that at the webinar once we've published the consultation.
Perfect, thank you. And just as a reminder, this event today is very much kind of giving a flavour of some of our thinking behind some of these concepts. It's not necessarily kind of our committed direction of travel, but we really wanted to test this with students today to gather your thoughts really, and to make sure that we're actively considering your input at this early kind of policy development stage. And as Sally said, there is much more to come when the consultation does go live. So yeah, we do really encourage you to participate as much as you can, if at all possible, to really share your views with us. But yeah, we seriously thank you for kind of everything that's come through so far today. Just going to see if there's one final question. Apologies. Okay, new question which has come in. I know we've already touched on some of this today, but from the perspective of somebody working within a university, what are the main consumer law risk areas that the OfS would expect providers to be most alert to in day-to-day practice? Quite an interesting question there. Apologies, I'm not too sure if we can definitely answer that one, but Sally, do you have any views on that?
I don't think I can give a specific view on that. I'd have to go away and think about, but I think the three key areas are ones that we've already set out. So absolutely being clear at the outset about the commitments you're making to students, so that you actually deliver on those promises. making sure that your terms and conditions are actually fair. There's a lot already in the CMA guidance, but consumer protection law also sets that out. We still find terms and conditions that, as the example given by Katie, where, for example, there might be a wide discretion to vary a course without telling students the circumstances in which they might do that, or consult students. And also ensuring your complaints processes and redress mechanisms are fair and easy to use, and students are supported to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sally. If it's okay, I'm going to direct us towards a close of this particular session, but we've got a couple of further updates to give you. But I also just wanted to re-emphasize what I just said a moment ago. This very much is kind of, the journey we're going on around consumer protection. And so, yeah, we really hope you continue to kind of engage with us, share your thoughts, and, continue to participate as we kind of evolve our thinking and our action in this particular area. So if it's okay, I will thank Sally and Katie very much for leading us in this session, and I'll pass back over to Harriet to give us a couple of updates and notices.
Hi. So next, we would really like to know from you guys what you would like to hear from us in the future. So we've got this slide here. This covers some topics that we've previously covered and what we've heard in the past from students that they would like to hear from us. If you'd like to put anything in the chat, and feel free to say if there's topics that we've previously covered that you'd like to see again, or like more information on, or any other topics that aren't on these lists. Yeah, I'll give you a few minutes to have a little think about that. Also, if you want to like other people's comments, that is also really useful. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next section, but if you want to drop us anything by email, that would be really useful. Yeah. So next, I just want to cover student news, which is our regular roundup of latest OfS news and developments that are of interest of you. We circulate this at least once a term, and you can subscribe using the QR code on the screen. And it's a great way of keeping up with what we're doing. We're also on social media such as X, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And I'm going to hand back to Ed for the close of session.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Harriet. And just to say that student news is a really key way that we can continue to continue this dialogue with you. I can see somebody's put in the chat about providing feedback about what we do with these sessions, and absolutely that's one of the things which we'll look to do from today, is to provide feedback on what happens next with the consumer protection information that you've worked with us today on, and yeah, we'll continue to obviously keep you updated with all of the latest kind of news and developments coming from the OfS, but clearly with kind of a student facing lens to it. So yeah, really that leaves me just to say thank you very much for joining us today, and I hope it's been a useful session. If you do have any further questions, feel free to contact us on the email address provided in the slides. We'd also like you just to quickly complete one final poll for us, just to rate this event. We want to make sure that these are useful, meaningful, and well received by yourselves. So please do obviously let us know. And yeah, that I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again. Thank you so much for your input today. We do really appreciate your time coming to join us, and we hope it's been a useful session for you. Thank you very much.